research assignment, I wanted to explore the lores and customs of children's playground culture. Some of the key questions I will be answering are, where does the lore originate from? How is it transferred between children? And why does it persist to this day? And what kind of changes has it undergone? In order for me to go about doing this research, I got myself admitted to a local elementary school in the growing town of Markham. Here I did some anthropological research on the culture and customs of children. Here I observed that many games that the children are playing now have been played back since ancient times. The only difference is that many of these games have undergone changes. The rules have changed. Many of the content of the lyrics to rhymes have been updated to reflect a more contemporary time. But before I move on, I find that it's important to tell you about a little history of the origin of children's playground culture in order to fully grasp what the lore is truly about. We can trace the folklore back to the industrialization era, where kids became separated from the economic machinery. Here the children started to form subcultures of their own and began to organize, and eventually it evolved into what we now know as children's folklore. However, we can trace the customs and practices of children's folklore even further back to the Middle Ages. Here, children were free from apprenticeships in local institutions, where they were allowed to roam the streets and to go exploring and to engage in traditional pastimes that defined life in the Middle Ages. Here, children began to organize themselves into subcultural groups based on their neighborhoods, villages, or even towns. Many of these traditions evolved from these organizations and carried on into the advent of the Industrial Revolution, where the children's culture was separated from the economic radar. They reaffirmed themselves as a distinct subculture, separate from the adult world, engaging in leisure activities that were only available to them since historic periods. An important thing to note here is that old traditional games were customized to fit the elementary needs of children who spread the words amongst each other at school and on the playgrounds. Eventually, with state-funded public schools, children had an outlet, perhaps a way, to share and intermingle with one another or with other subcultural groups in order to amalgamate these various subcultures to become the folklore we now know. So this brings us to our next question. What exactly is children's folklore and what does it entail? Folklorists describe children's folklore as enduring, conservative, and traditional, but at the same time, it is seen as inventive, creative, and modern. So what can we make out of all this? Playground culture continues to change and update with contemporary times while preserving its historic origins. Now, I'm going to move on to talk about some of the traditional practices and customs that are carried on till this day, all the while constantly being updated by children to fit with modern times. Going back to the definition of children's folklore being very traditional and conservative, it is the children themselves who are the very conservative keepers of ancient traditions and customs. My personal observation through my anthropological research has been that the kids are still singing jingles and tunes that have been around for the past 100 years. For example, I had the short-lived pleasure and torture of sitting through an entire busload of kids singing 99 bottles of beer on the wall until they hit one bottle of beer. But at the same time, children can be seen as inventors, and I use this word with extra caution because they do not exactly invent or author new games and lore. Rather, they alter and update traditional ones to fit into the cultural context. So in this sense, they are inventing new lyrics to rhymes or rules to games, but are maintaining and keeping the same format. For example, I was able to witness firsthand a revised game of dodgeball that the children were playing during gym class. Instead of the old rules of one hit you're out, the game has been revised so that the game can go on a little longer. The new rules state that if you're hit by the ball, you are to go to the opponent's side and to shoot baskets until you score. Should you be successful, you are then allowed to return to your side to participate once more. The changes that we see do not only apply to the rules of games, but the way that children express themselves. With media and technology quickly becoming a popular medium, parents have become quick to criticize video games, pop culture, and television for the disappearance of childhood. But what they fail to realize is that the children's culture is evolving, and that the adults are still trying to hold on to the old cultures of their own childhood. Children are now creating their own subcultures different from the adult world, especially in cyberspace. However, parents are now quick to criticize this new culture as a step back from the old, as it makes use of incorrect grammar and language. But what parents fail to realize is that these are perfectly valid ways for children to express themselves. An example would be the use of symbols as a way of expressing children's emotions, or the development of new words to express old ideas. And these new ideas are now being imported onto the playground where children use them on a day-to-day basis, and it becomes a part of their lore. In the end, children's culture has proven to be very resilient against change, but at the same time it is constantly evolving and changing to reflect new modern ideas. Children are always seeking new ways to integrate new ideas into their lore, despite criticisms from the adults. However, one thing is for certain, that children's culture will never remain static and will continue to be a dynamic entity.